Morning. It's quite a nice sunny morning here. Just doing my usual Sunday walk around, see how the grass is coming along. Cost of hay has been so exorbitant this winter. I'm pretty excited for a bit of spring grass to come through to help bring the feed bill down a bit, and it's starting to come. But as usual, when I'm doing my walk around on a Sunday, I tend to daydream about racing. I'm pretty one-dimensional like that. And as a Welshman, the rugby's not anything to be thinking about at the moment. And yesterday, I think the highlight really was KITTYSLIGHT. I think that's hard to argue with. He's a really popular horse, been well trained by Christian Williams. Very flat bred, not designed to be a chaser, bought cheaply. I think it's a story that plenty of people have sort of grabbed onto. But one of the words that came up a lot on my media feed yesterday in relation to Kitty was scope, or lack of scope for jumping a fence. And it occurred to me that scope is a word that's generally used in racing and equestrian circles. It's not a word you tend to use a lot in everyday conversation, I don't think. So I thought there might be some people that perhaps don't understand what scope is, or don't understand fully what it is. So I thought I'd have a go when I was wandering around the field to explain what I understand by scope and how it can affect a horse's ability to perform over fences or not. So I think the first thing to explain is that a horse has four legs. That's not the bit I'm explaining. I think everyone knows that. But of the four legs, the hind legs are where they generate the power from. They're effectively rear wheel drive. And when they generate their power, it's a combination of using their big backside muscles and then their hock joint, which is a joint situated halfway down their back leg, kind of on the same line as the knee on the front leg, but it's not a knee joint. It is a hinging joint, and a combination of the power they can generate from their muscles and the angles they can create with their hock joint are largely involved in determining how much power they can generate. So when jumping, a horse has to generate power to jump up and ideally jump across and gain a couple of lengths in the air, as it's called. Now Kitty clearly isn't the biggest and the strongest. Doesn't look to me to be the most athletic. He's quite a stiff little horse, full of heart, but not necessarily perhaps full of athleticism. And I think he's probably only got about enough scope for jumping fences. He certainly hasn't got much in reserve. So when the ground goes soft and he's sinking in, and the ground I think was quite soft and tacky yesterday at Newcastle. I think the clerk of the course put plenty of water down, didn't want to get caught out having ground any quicker than good. He was sort of going into the ground a little bit yesterday, and I think that was compromising how much scope. Effectively, it's like you trying to jump something stood in a ditch versus jumping something stood on a step. Stood on a step makes it much easier. You have to generate less height, less distance. And I saw lots of feeds yesterday saying that Kitty's never travelled, he belted every fence. I think that's a bit of sort of media talk. The 20-foot crocodile you caught was actually 15 foot. The 40-yard free kick you scored was actually 12 yards. I watched it again this morning. He actually jumped pretty well, I thought, and he travelled quite well. His jumping was worse down the back straight than the home straight. He didn't make a mistake that I could see until the first open ditch down the back on the first circuit. But his jumping did look severely compromised when they picked the pace up down the back straight last time. Now, connections trainers and jockeys that I spoke to yesterday said that they felt that the tackiest ground was down the back straight, and so I think that marries into why Kitty's jumping was more under pressure down the back. He was getting stuck in the ground a bit more and wasn't quite having the power to get out of it. And equally, as the race pace was picking up, Jack was trying to keep him in touch, and a couple of good jumps would have been helpful. But it was interesting to see that, having asked him up for one and not got the answer he was hoping for, and I think the second down the back straight the second time, Jack didn't make the same mistake again. He sort of sat still, took his medicine, and didn't ask for any huge leaps. So that's Kitty jumping on soft ground. I think that compromised him. He looks the sort of horse, the way you see him finish his race off, that you'd think a more severe stamina test with softer ground would suit him better, but I think it would actually compromise him more, because he'd sink further into the ground and find his scope even harder to come by. Equally, big, strong horses can find their jumping compromised on better ground, firmer ground, because they jump with more power. They put more power through their limbs and their body on landing, and can find it a bit of a jarring feeling. And so consequently, they try and close their scope down. They don't want to jump so high and so far to minimize the forces going through their body. And that can then compromise their scope, not because they can't access it, but because they'd rather not. So that's a little look at scope. To finish with, I thought it was a really good ride yesterday by Jack Tudor. You know, he clearly knows kitties very well. I actually joked that he mentioned it, I think, in the first line of his post-race interview, just so that Christian didn't get any ideas about pulling a amateur with a £7 claim over from Ireland next time Kitty runs. But I think, all joking aside, knowing kitties is clearly very important. Coming from my sport of eventing, I think there was probably only a handful of times I evented a horse without having sat in it before, and it was pretty unusual. We would put a lot of emphasis on knowing your horse, knowing how it reacts in a situation. And I'm often surprised that more emphasis isn't put on horse and jockey partnerships, or on the negative effect a jockey horse partnership being broken up for various reasons can have. And I think that's a job well done by Christian, who's nurtured Jack through. Jack clearly knows the horse really well. I think it was a good result all round. And finally, just to point out, amongst all the whip talk at the moment, Jack rode Staying Chaser that was off the bridle plenty, and on my counting, and we'll perhaps hold our breath till Tuesday, but on my counting he stayed well within the rules, had a horse finishing full of running. So, you know, personally, when these jockeys are talking about how hard done by they are, the rules have changed by one. Jack Tudor yesterday was proof that it can be done on a horse that takes plenty of riding. So I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you found it useful. If you did, hit the like and subscribe button. And I'll hopefully have a video about teaching a young horse to jump up in the next couple of weeks. Enjoy the rest of your weekend.